say, wanted to get started, actually kind of had this on the radar of things to talk about, and Ross brought it up here about 10 minutes ago as he was popping in. Um, those of you that have been paying attention to the local, both print and TV media will have noticed that the county school board has been experiencing some financial strife, we will call it. And so I will say openly that the city does not have access to their books. I don't know fully what the problem is there. I will summarize kind of quickly what I have seen or heard in some of the print media that I have read, and I'm fully aware that there are news articles coming out basically every day on this, and so I may not be up to date on everything, but generally speaking, they went through an audit and had have two things kind of at a high level that are happening there. One is a violation of the Fiscal Control Act, which is that they are expending more funds than were budgeted. That's obviously not allowed. And then Fred's popping in here. And then the second thing, good morning, Fred. We're going to have a quick conversation about the school board and what we don't know about what's happening over there with their finances before we get started. So the first thing, a violation of the Fiscal Control Act with respect to them overspending the budget. And then the second piece is spending down a lot of fund balance, which kind of makes sense. If you're spending a lot more than you were budgeted, then you were probably going to spend some of your cash reserves in doing that unless there was some significant influx of money, which there wasn't. Like I said, again, without knowing the specifics there, having talked to a few people, my understanding is that it was mostly personnel related, that they were expending funds, I'm going to say at a high level, either paying people more than they had projected or paying more people than they had projected to pay. So having lost some level of control, either with position control or with kind of the forecasted amounts to pay people overall. I do know that the state is going to come in, the state auditor's office is going to have a nice little fun time with them as to exactly what happened. So I'm sure over the course of the next couple of months, there will be more articles about this. Perhaps more important than what is happening to the county would be what controls does the city have in place to keep this kind of thing from happening. And so we, from a personnel perspective and a non-personnel perspective, on the operating budget side, do a significant amount of projections down here in the budget office on an annual basis, particularly at this time of the year as we get closer to year end. And so the budget presentation, the budget book that comes out next week, as well as the budget presentation that we'll give to City Council, will show, particularly for the general fund, but we look at all of the enterprise funds, and you'll see little kind of snippets of their expected year ends, that we are doing those kinds of analyses on a regular basis to ensure that we are not going to be overspending, again, either from having a budget violation, which is overspending what council has authorized, or two, ensuring that our revenues are sufficient such that we're not spending down our cash reserves more than we expected to in any of those funds. A great example of this would be our transit fund, where we are spending down a significant amount of fund balance, but we intended to do that this year. When you see, and we'll kind of talk about this at the end, and at the CBAC's next meeting, Pat will have already presented the budget, staff will have already gone through it, and we'll go into a lot of detail. But are going to have to, we have been showing City Council, but we'll have to be raising kind of the tax rate to create sufficient funds for the transit system. The current year's budget basically expended all of the available cash we had. I told council last year if they wanted to maintain service that they would have to raise the tax rate, and without spilling the beans for next week, you will see an effective tax rate increase for the transit system that we have been talking about for quite some time with council. But again, at a higher level, I'm not really openly and honestly sure how you miss overspending both the budget and spending significant amounts of fund balance. It will be very interesting from an audit perspective to see what communications did or did not take place with respect to internal controls, catching or not catching that level of spending. So I think there's a lot more to come there, but we do have a lot of those controls in place in the city that are actually built into our financial processes. all kinds of reviews at the departmental level for salary, as well as kind of centralized offices, budget, and a finance office that should be doing projections of a lot of those. Um, from a capital project side, so I know what the county's experience is not a capital project side. The vast majority of capital budgets for us don't have any personnel in them at all. They're all AP checks. And so we have an array of internal controls in place to ensure none of those happen when we write AP checks. You must have a budget in place, and there must be a budget in place. And when the check is actually written, they will check to make sure that the appropriation hasn't already been encumbered or spent anywhere. There are a few places on the capital project side from time to time every city runs into where you budget something and then you don't get the money. But those are usually few and far between. If you thought you were going to get a grant and then you didn't get it, things like that. Those don't happen very often. They're kind of one-off situations. So I will say, both as the budget director and as the department head over top of our internal audit division, I think that we have some pretty good controls in place. You will see there are a couple of things here in the recommendations that I expanded on from what we talked about last month, where I think there are, in addition to controls, there's some reporting that we can do, both at the city council and public level, that will provide another level of kind of information and review for that as well. But generally, Ross, I don't have a lot of details there other than to say I know there's more coming. I think it's on the personnel side, and I would be willing to bet somewhere in there they lost some of those controls on either position control or how they pay people. That usually rests in some fashion between HR, budget, and finance. But it'll be very interesting once the auditors get to digging in what they actually find. It will probably be several months. Those audits don't generally tend to happen quickly. There's a lot of backup documentation that has to be reviewed. So it may be when we're meeting again in October that we hop into another CBAC meeting and it starts with another news article on what's happening locally. So that's kind of, like I said, at a high level, what I have understood and known. If anybody has any questions about any of kind of how the city works, happy to answer any of those. But I don't think that we're going to find ourselves in the situation that school board has found itself in. I will say, if you've been watching the county recently, the county has been experiencing something not nearly like what the school board is, but where they're spending down a little more of their general fund balance. I think that they intended. Their budget actually includes a larger fund balance appropriation. Counties tend to have larger fund balance appropriations. Sometimes they don't spend them for various reasons because of the way the contracts work with the state. And Janice can answer some of this because she worked over there. But generally speaking, I think they're spending at a higher rate than what they were expecting. They caught that, they've seen that, and their controls have worked, and they are kind of reducing their expenses so that they don't spend so much down. So I think the county has probably, at a 30,000 foot level, actually done what you expect a local government or an entity to do. When they see that, they caught it on the front end, they made some adjustments. They will spend down some fund balance, but not nearly as much as they would have had someone not been paying attention to what they were doing. So I would say kudos to the county for catching that when they did.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else in that general light? And if not, like I said, we'll kind of hop into the meat of the agenda, which is really kind of discussing the report itself and realistically those recommendations that are on page 4 of it. Seeing no others, I'll just kind of jump in. I think, Janice, if you've got the ability to screen share this, I think what we'll do, we'll kind of go in reverse order. We'll start with the recommendations that are on page 4, and then we'll scroll backwards after we have some substantial discussion and conversation there about if there's anything else you see that needs to be changed in the narrative component. So staff, in drafting these, kind of put them in a couple of different places. First is related to revenue recommendation, second related to expenditure recommendation, and the third one more in line with the larger debt discussion we had. And so I will just kind of start, we'll go through them, I'll read them out, and then we'll just kind of open the floor very informally for discussion. If you want to add something there, you want to edit the wording, you want to include additional details, need some additional information, Apologize for reading this directly out of there, but as stated in the city fiscal policies and the budget document, the city should look at diversifying its revenue structure so as not to rely on property tax specifically, but property and sales tax very much. This is in the fiscal policy section at the front of our budget document. What we don't want to do is continue to raise the tax rate when there are other opportunities with a more diversified revenue base. So very specifically there, appropriately charging users for services to mitigate those tax rate increases or tax levy increases. So the first recommendation would be to conduct a review of all current user fees and the recommended fee schedules, or recommend a fee schedule increase based on benchmarking data with peer jurisdictions. So the idea there, if you were to look at our user fees, and we talked about this, I think probably 2 or 3 months ago, we have a lot of older user fees. So I will tell you openly, as part of the FY26 budget that's going to be proposed, our recreation department went in and did a pretty good job of looking at many of their older fees that were related to programs and facility rentals. And so the city manager's budget is going to propose some increases to some of our recreation user fees. The city manager's message will say this. There are, and you could openly just pull up our user fee manual right now and look at it. But nearly 90% of our recreation and parks user fees have not been adjusted in more than a decade. And so each year you don't adjust something, obviously the real value of it lowers each year. And so this recommendation is kind of twofold. One is looking at all of those user fees, ensuring that in the appropriate places you get them back, either based on peer benchmarks or cost recovery goals. And then kind of the second part there is creating a schedule for review where you would look at ensuring that some of these fees don't make it to 10, 15, 20 years old without either having been recommended for changes, increase or decrease based on market, or they just don't, again, kind of don't fall off the radar. I think we've intended to do this in the past. The city has tried, but I think it's appropriate here, having shown you what we showed you with reliance on property tax and sales tax continuing to escalate, that we look at those user fees. So anything in number 1 there that's interesting to you, that you think needs to be changed, or that you needs more specific focus? And again, anyone feel free to chime in if you would like. Well, I will take that as Janice did. Oh, yep, yes, he said it.
I have a question. So I understand the user fees. However, the language is saying some parks and recreations. Will we be more specific, or is there going to be a criteria to determine which parks are included in the consideration of adjusting their fees and which ones are not?
So the recommendation that we've drafted here is kind of more all-encompassing, which is CBAC is recommending that basically the city go through every user fee it's got in every department, figure out where it needs to be set, and then create a schedule for, are you going to look at them every year, every other year, 1/3 of them every 3 years? The Parks and Rec one, as an example, is something that Parks and Rec has actually already done as part of the 26 budget proposal. So what you would actually see when we showed the user fee manual shows the user fee type, the rate, and then there's a thing off to the side that says when it was last updated.
Okay.
And so we will actually have updated some of those, but this recommendation is more global, just to ensure that we're not allowing user fees to slide years and years and years without the appropriate level of review.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Scott, is there a centralized list of all of the user fees that's accessible to citizens?
There sure is. And I can go and grab a copy of it real quick and screen share it just so y'all can get a view at it. The city council adopts the user fee schedule updates every year with the budget. And so as part of the budget package that you'll see recommended through the budget workshops and then ultimately going to the council on June 16th is a resolution approving the user fee schedule. Just give me just a second and I will go find that document from last year and pull that up. But yeah, it does include all of the user fees for basically every department the city has. There are some that are not incorporated by reference. So utilities, water and sewer fees. There's a completely separate document where, I didn't type that correctly. Where utilities goes through, there's a the rate structure for water and sewer fees is, I'm going to say, kind of mind-boggling because all of the different meter sizes, and then over time they're going to do rate equalizations. But if you live inside the city, in one of the other municipalities, outside of a municipality, in the county, or outside of the county, those are all different rate differentials as well. And so depending on what consumption level you have, what size meter you have, and where you live, there are numerous rate structures there. But give me just a second and I will pull up the user fee schedule that was adopted by City Council last year. Okay. I should have pulled this thing up beforehand.
Well, related question too, with looking at benchmarking data, is there, do we have some sort of, like, where do we try to fit within benchmarking with peers? Do we have a standard or just somewhere in the middle?
So, Emily, I'll be perfectly honest, that's probably something that we could add to number one there. I will say each department, when they provide to us that they want to change a user fee, we are looking for benchmarking data. Generally speaking, when the city looks at benchmarking data, we look at the other larger cities in North Carolina and cities that are close by. So the start is usually the Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Charlotte, and then bring in High Point. But it really does depend on what user fee you're doing, what peer benchmark someone will use. Charlotte and Raleigh are tending more and more to become interesting benchmarks for us as they are significantly larger and moving in different areas. When Planning and Development Services looks at fees, they look at them sometimes more regionally too. So they'll look at what is Davie County, Davidson County, Guilford County, Stokes County kind of doing. So there's not a specific set. We use exactly these jurisdictions every time. And then you'll get into like last year with fire, we may charge a fee for something that another city doesn't, or we may do it on a completely different basis than they do it, where we do it on square footage and they do it on value or something like that. And so sometimes you have to find a different benchmark that's kind of using the same format that you're using. But that is definitely something that can be incorporated into that first recommendation. Janice, if you'll unshare that for a second, I'm gonna I've got this thing up and I will try and screen share the user fee manual. Hopefully this works. Is everyone seeing the user fee schedule table of contents? Very good. So the answer to that question here is this is the document, and we go through, and again, every department. So you've got Planning and Development Services, all of the inspections fees are in here based on single family, commercial, multifamily, the building, electrical, HVAC, mechanical systems, all those types of things are in here. And I could scroll for quite a long time, but you've got Planning and Development Services, our Business Inclusion and Advancement Department, which will be renamed our Office of Economic Development coming this year. It does several types of permits for special events. We've got our neighborhood services and community development fees that are related to abatements and other things that they do in neighborhood services, our sanitation fees. Again, we've got some of the water and sewer there, but I think there's a disclaimer down here that says if you want to see the full thing, you can click here. And again, basically anything that a department charges is listed in here. And so, for example, I will scroll down to where the recreation section was that we were talking about. And you can see there are quite a few here for recreation and parks. So everything from operations at Historic Bethabara to renting Corpening Plaza, equipment rentals, the Showmobile, which is the stage rentals. And if you go down the right side here, you'll see quite a few of these that have effective dates that are more than 10 years old. And in some cases here, you're pushing 2 to 3 decades. So I will say, in some cases, the city council has given us directives over the years that they didn't want to see massive fee increases. And so some of that is whether or not the council the users of those, and as you don't increase those user fees, the general tax base, everyone starts to pay for those things that someone who specifically used it used to pay for. And so again, we've got all kinds of athletics, the golf courses, swimming fees, boat rentals, marina, all kinds of stuff like that. But the user fee manual is 29 pages long and is intended to reference everything that the city charges by department. So I will unshare that, and Janice has the note kind of on potentially identifying benchmarks and what the methods are for ensuring that we're using the same benchmarks where appropriate. Anything else on that first one? If not, we'll kind of move on to the second one. So the first one is about user fees, and it's really looking at your current user fees. The second one is aimed at looking at new user fees where appropriate. I put a couple of things on there just as examples. And again, this one is meant to be kind of more global, to do some research on what other cities are using in terms of user fees. The two I have on here, fire operations medical calls. This has been talked about before, but essentially, I think there is at least one other city in the state that has implemented. They're not actually the fire department. This isn't charging for ambulance services, but this is if the fire department shows up to a medical call, or say it's even a wreck out on the interstate, that there's a small fee associated with them providing that service to you. And then the other one is one that I know that the city manager has talked about. There are a lot of other cities and counties across North Carolina that have collection services fees where they pay for their residential garbage or recycling collection services, not just through taxes, but through a monthly or bi-monthly fee. Part of what that does is changing the burden on who uses it. If it's completely on the tax base, then that means that there are a lot of commercial and industrial businesses that are in some way paying for residential garbage collection service that they're not receiving. There are a few, and we could find some of those examples for you, but there are actually a few cities that do their entire garbage collection services as an enterprise where they charge, none of it is on the tax rate, and they charge enough via monthly fees for all of their collection services. I don't know that that's something that we would completely look at. But again, this one, number 2, is kind of more of a do some research and come back with some ideas to city council of, for the people who are using these services, is there a way to create revenue from those that doesn't create a burden for every taxpayer? Part of the thought of that, the fire operations one as well, for service fees, is that there are a lot of folks going up and down the interstates that get into car wrecks or have issues that are not city residents, and the city resident is paying for that response to that service. So that is one of the examples that the fire department used, I think 6 or 8 years ago when they initially proposed looking at that fee. But number 2 is really to look at new revenue generation ideas for user fees. So happy to kind of stop there and have any conversations amongst the group there as to whether you think that is a good idea, or want to add or edit anything from that recommendation. And not hearing a lot there, I will presume that this one is that we are all in alignment that reviewing that, doing that research, and potentially presenting that to the management team and city council is a good idea. Is there anything else that any of the members wanted to talk about or add from a revenue perspective? So we talked a lot about property taxes, obviously this year because of reval, and it's the largest component of general fund revenues. But before we move on to the expenditure side, is there anything else on the revenue side from any conversations we had previously that anyone wanted to bring up or wanted to potentially make a recommendation related to that area? All right. Well, we will move right along on the expenditure side. Again, I think some of the conversations we had in the prior months were around, how do the city's expenditures grow year to year? What I would tell you, we went through how we do our base budget requirements, and we look at enhancements. And so we have a very tight control on trying to keep those expenditures within reasonable growth each year. But specifically in this area, the first thing up there is create public and management specific dashboards for expenditure review to ensure spending is in line with budget and to review multi-year expenditure growth. So a lot of cities have online dashboards that show budget to actuals or show several years worth of expenditures so that residents can see this. This recommendation is kind of twofold. One, it's to create those for the management team so that they are reviewing things at a little more granular level. Again, I don't expect what has happened over at the school system to happen to us, but this is kind of a nod towards that and saying, make sure that you're providing the appropriate management tools for review. But then also, again, kind of showing it publicly. I think we went over this. The city has what is often referred to as an open checkbook application. And so you can go and review, click into the general fund, the police department, their supplies budget, and you can actually go see how much, they spent on ammunition or, uniforms or whatever it is that you want to look at. This would be more of a summary of that level of data so that you could see total spending much more easily without having to click through several different drop downs. Again, the idea there being that we provide the information publicly so that there is some level of public confidence that we are spending within the budget, but then also creating those management specific dashboards so that as things pop up like they have with the county school board, that the management team could review in very quick format where we are with respect to authorized positions, position funding, vacancy levels, those types of things. Any questions or edits there? That one's kind of more of a creation of whether they be Power BI dashboards or something to that effect, just to summarize spending so that everyone can review it.
I love this recommendation. One thought that I have, I'm wondering if it would be possible to somehow provide a little bit of context specifically around department spending, around maybe what their priorities for that fiscal year are, to understand the reasoning behind some of the spending, especially if it's out of line with prior years.
That is absolutely something that Janice, we can work into the recommendation there. That's an interesting one. I think we always deal with this in budget, and we're going to deal with it here in the next week. There's a lot of the year-to-year spending that is, your department spending went up 5% because we gave 6% worth of raises and, a 1% increase in the state mandated retirement costs. But to highlight specifics there of why certain things went up would make complete sense. I think we'd have to think about, do you do it at a departmental level? Do you do it kind of at the citywide budget level? That's some interesting food for thought there, and definitely can work that in, basically adding context to some of that expenditure growth. I will say at a high level, a lot of times what we're asked for, the manager has asked for this, and I've got to make sure that we get to it. The city of Greensboro takes a $1 bill each year, and they divide it into what percentage of the tax rate basically supports that. So what do you get for every dollar in taxes that you do? And so that's another example of kind of highlighting what you get for the money that you're spending. But I think we understand what you're getting at there, and can definitely add something, make sure that we get the context for the budget document itself, we have our budget highlights will cover some of that. So that may be interesting. And how do we incorporate some of the stuff that we're already producing with a public facing dashboard like that?
Yeah,
Very-
that would be, yeah, I think that would be helpful. Just because sometimes you see something jump up and you don't really understand why, but there's a perfectly logical
Yeah.
explanation. And so I think that could help. But just a thought.
I think it's a great thought. Anything else to add to that one? Alrighty, moving on to the fourth recommendation below it. This one is a little more interesting, and I think it came up in one of our conversations again a couple of months ago, when there were questions about how much do we allow the city's budget to grow each year, or do we have a growth target? I think we have, when we do our financial projections, our multi-year financial projections, we have growth assumptions in there. So I kind of created this one, Janice and I created this one based on some of the feedback we heard from you, but it's reviewing the potential for a stated, and I put there, controllable expenditure growth policy or practices document for certain spending categories, meaning like over time, are we trying to keep our personnel, whether you say in line with market conditions or not to exceed amount, or even, we don't want our IT costs to grow at more than 5% per year, or we're looking at our medical claims costs. Obviously, those are all things that we want to keep as low as we can, but should there be some kind of policy that has a trigger to it for a more substantial review, if we start seeing 10, 12% changes in medical claims costs because we are self-insured, do we need to go back and have a policy that says we should be looking at A, the cost share with the premiums for the employees, or B, are there certain types of coverages that we need to think about, should we be providing them at the level that we're providing them? So number 4 is an interesting one for us as staff. It's something I would talk to the city manager about. We don't have specifically stated expenditure growth policies. So I think this is one that would be interesting to propose this, have some discussions with the management team about, and see if city council was interested in us trying to cap that in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Obviously, if something has to happen, you would, I guess, have to violate the policy, or at least you would have to explain in great detail, this is what we are trying to accomplish. These are the constraints we put on ourselves from a fiscal planning perspective. And if we're going to move outside of those constraints, this is why. So again, that kind of an expenditure growth control policy. This one is more of a kind of an idea than specifics. I don't know that I've seen this stated publicly anywhere, so it would be interesting. But again, that's just kind of discussing with the city council. We see that expenditures are growing. There's an organic growth rate for expenditures that's higher than the organic growth rate for revenues. Should you be looking at how to close that gap, really, from the 30,000 foot level? That's kind of what we're intending with that. Happy to completely reword that one, change it, add some context, or anything else that the group is interested in seeing with that one. And it may be that this is a recommendation, if it goes through, that we are the first city to try and tackle something like this. So it never hurts to be on the cutting edge of looking at something differently and having stated policies for it. But again, this one was kind of more based on the conversations that we had a couple of months ago with expenditure growth. Without any significant changes to that one, we will move along to the more fun ones down here at the bottom related to city debt recommendations. I will tell you, in the fiscal year 26 proposed budget that comes out next week, you're going to see some of these pretty substantial changes that we have been discussing, that you have kind of been privy to, that will be proposed in one format or fashion in the budget. So the first one is the elimination of the internal leasing program. and to use existing cash balances to pay off all of that existing debt that has been issued for vehicles, and if the vehicle hasn't been purchased yet, to use available cash to go ahead and purchase all of those vehicles in cash as well. The mechanism for this, and we won't put it here in the recommendation for this, but you'll see in the city's budget, is our debt service fund has a pretty substantial fund balance. And so what we've been doing is transferring money out of our debt service fund to pay off all of that debt that's technically in the leasing fund. It is a very large number. It's in the realm or range of about $50 million for general government activities. And then our enterprise funds would use their individual cash balances. So you think water and sewer would use its water and sewer cash to pay for all the trucks and jetters and things like that they have out there. Again, the idea behind this one is getting rid of that internal leasing program and not making millions of dollars in interest payments annually that we are starting to accumulate, particularly at the high interest rates that we're paying in the current financing environment. So we did kind of discuss this one pretty well. Is there anything anyone wants to add contextually or kind of change the wording there?
I would, if I may weigh in on this one.
Mhm.
So when there's always there's advantages and disadvantages to either approach, of course.
Mhm.
If we buy these things, then what I can say, I'm not even going to call it a disadvantage, but when you have a lease, that also means that you can have service sometimes. Like if these things go crazy, they're machines. So if they break down, they don't work anymore, they whatever, you can turn that thing in and get something else, you can whatever. But when you purchase something, just like in our personal lives, it's the repairs, everything. If it's messed up, it's messed up. It's on us. We have to fix it. We have to pay for it. So in terms of looking at the money aspect, I can see that we can create some savings and interest. But has there been, or was there, or is there any consideration of an estimation of, now that we own these things, where these things are in their useful life? Where are these, like if we're going to just pay these things off, are we going to end up, I know you can't really project breakdowns. I mean, that's hard to project, but are we going to come out better in the long run owning all the things than we would if we lease them and we're able to just turn them in if they mess up and get something else or give it back? Or like is there any projection that can be done, being mindful that we don't know when things will break down? Any over the long term, is it better for us to purchase them, or are there some things that really should remain on lease because we know they have a propensity to have problems?
Let me answer that twofold. One is a kind of a technical component of this, and the second is probably an addition to the recommendation. So the technical component of this is, although we call it a leasing program internally, it's an installment purchase contract essentially.
Oh, so we're buying them all anyway.
We call it leasing, but we're financing the vehicle to own.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a lease through another vendor. You do bring up an interesting question, which is that that has come up from time to time, and I don't know that there's been a formal evaluation of is it cheaper for like our administrative sedan fleet to lease that rather than to own it.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
I think what you may have here is either a sub recommendation or maybe even a completely separate one that is one is getting rid of our internal leasing program, which is our internal financing program, and moving cash to save money. But then there's a second piece of, is there I guess performing a benefit cost analysis of looking at the types of vehicles that it may be advantageous to have through an external vendor lease.
That's my question.
An enterprise rent-a-car, those kind of.
Yeah, not for all the things, because obviously, but it may be to recommend a review or vetting of the types so that we can maybe look at, or they can look at, like you said, certain things that we know kind of have a propensity for needing a lot of repair work. Is it advantageous to put certain things on an outside lease? And then, of course, looking for the best pricing and all things considered, of course, and then purchase outright the things that, for example, have longer useful lives, the things that are just some sort of vetting, some sort of review of these different machinery and equipment to see what might make more sense, and still keep the plan to eliminate the internal leasing, like you said, to still do that, but not necessarily purchase outright every single thing. That's I'm doing that now in my office with these copy machine, all of our leases, and we're reviewing. So it kind of just made me think through some of this too. During that review, we found that there were some things that we need to keep on lease because it comes the packages, some of them come with service packages, and we're like, do we really want to be fixing this stuff and paying somebody to come fix this stuff all the time and replacing these parts? We don't even know what we're doing, and ordering, and so some of the things that have a lot of complicated pieces and moving parts, we're like, yeah, we need to keep that on the lease. We don't want to be messing around trying to figure that thing out and buying parts. And then some of the things that are more straight, forward, it's like we should just buy it. We're spending a lot of money dragging this out for 5 years, and we really could just buy while we have the money. Let's just buy the things. So that's just my own little thoughts on this. Thank you.
I think it's absolutely appropriate to have that. We have all of our copiers are leased because we don't want to deal with the maintenance and those types of things as well. Without getting into the specifics here, we'll probably keep this one at the 30,000 foot level. When this conversation has come up previously, it's usually centered around the standard, what I'll call the standardized vehicles in the fleet. It's the administrative sedans, the half-ton trucks, those types of things. I don't know, and generally speaking, I don't think we've looked at, refuse trucks and sewer jetters and those types of things. I don't even know if there are lease agreements out there, or if they are. It'd be interesting to look at those. I think Janice has got the note here. We will either kind of have this one as a sub bullet, or it may migrate itself to actually being a separate recommendation to do a review of fleet management policies and look at those types of vehicles that do some sort of, like I said, a benefit cost analysis on whether it would be better to lease those from an external vendor than outright own and service them internally. Absolutely. Anything else on the equipment leasing recommendation? All right, we will move down to what is currently recommendation number 6, which is eliminating the use of 2/3 bonds for what we're going to call short-term capital projects and switch to cash financing. And I have here, as we had discussed, kind of the only way to really do that and maintain capacity to do the larger projects later is increasing the tax rate. As we talked about, our 2/3 bond capacity is about $10 million every other year, which works out to $5 million a year, and 1.3 cents creates $5 million a year. This recommendation at a high level, and again, we can change the wording if you want to, is there are roofs, HVAC units, types of facility, what we call facility renewal projects and other smaller projects. We're using bond money for it, and it just makes a lot more sense financially to do it in cash, to not pay interest for 20 years on some of those improvements. And in some cases where some of those things may not even last 20 years, to finance something for 20 years. So this is one that I can tell you absolutely that the city manager is recommending directly to the city council as a financial best practice. Again, our current city manager is a former past president of GFOA of the United States and Canada. And so this is one that I am fully in agreement with him. It's a practice that we've had for quite a long time, but something he's showing to city council, which is essentially don't mortgage out something you shouldn't mortgage out, is what we're saying there. Anything you want us to add to that one? And again, there'll be a pretty robust discussion about this, both during the operating and capital budget presentations to city council next week. But anything you want to change there? Any details you want us to add?
Scott,
Yes, sir, Ross.
I just have a question. What is the definition of a 2/3 bond?
So as I read that, having written it, I realized we probably needed to expand that recommendation. So 2/3 bonds are general obligation bonds that the city is allowed to go out. The way the calculation works, a city is allowed to issue 2/3 of the net principal retirement in any given year. The following year, without having to go out for a referendum. So generally speaking, when we do general obligation bonds, when we do those large packages, it goes out on a referendum. The taxpayers vote on whether or not they want those bond packages to go through. The state many years ago realized that there was a need for cities to have the ability to do capital projects and some renovation type maintenance activity.
Okay.
Legal structure under which we can issue debt. So if just as an example, let's say you had $100 million in debt, general government debt, in any given year, and you paid down $10 million worth of that principal. This says that this part of the state statute says that you could issue 2/3 of that $10 million the following year. You could reissue that debt for whatever your capital needs are. So we'll do a better job defining 2/3 bonds there, so that anyone seeing that recommendation is aware of it. But generally speaking, it's a debt financing mechanism authorized by the state that allows us to not have to go out incessantly for capital maintenance for voter approval.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And the 2/3 bonds, we'll say this too for this group if I didn't already, they're already a part of our debt modeling and projections. And so this isn't having to change the way that we do anything. The idea for the city manager here is use cash for the things you should be using cash for, and use bond funding for the things you should be using bond funding for. So if we're going to completely rebuild a recreation center, when you see the capital plan that's proposed, instead of having maintenance activities for fields and lights and parking lots, what you'll see the 2/3 bonds are for replacing an entire rec center, just raising it to the ground and rebuilding it. Or same thing with a fire station. If you've got a 60-year-old fire station where it's getting close to the end of its useful life, the dormitories are not set up for the types of people and activities that we have. It makes a lot more sense to use 20-year debt financing for something that's a 50 or 60-year asset. So that is what you'll hear me talk about and hear the city manager talk about with respect to this recommendation. Anything else on that one? And then if not, number 7 is something that we already talked about and that we as a city are trying to kind of get off the ground pretty quickly here, and that you'll see in the 26 budget as well. And that's support for facility condition assessment or facility needs assessment and space planning. And the idea here is we know we've got some deferred maintenance. We need to take care of those maintenance activities first. And then we need to look at what of our assets need to be replaced. The second part of that recommendation is aligning the long-term debt model with kind of the long-term facility needs planning document that we'll put together. For quite some time, the city has been focused very much on what the next budget year is and in our 6-year capital planning window. And although that's probably about as much as you can really digest publicly in terms of where you're going to be, we do need a much longer staff planning document that's behind that. If you've got, again, assets that have 50 and 60-year replacement cycles, you need to know more than 5 years in advance when they get to the end of that replacement cycle. And so this is going out, making sure that we understand where our facilities, what their current condition is, modeling that and figuring out what does it look like to put aside enough money or to create a schedule to replace those assets as they come due in a better format. Again, this is something I think every city and county in probably every state struggles with. You built things a long time ago, particularly if you got grant money and you weren't thinking about a building 60 years ago, replacing a building that you built 60 years ago. But as many of them start to come due at the same time, you find that there is a need to have a very good long-term planning document on how to fund those replacements over time. And so that's what number 7 is really getting at. Anything else related to that one? And again, we might can add some language to it too, kind of as I've discussed here. If we need to make that one a little longer, we can do that as well. Talking about future planning and development needs. Anything on number 7 or anything that we've missed as we've had our conversations over the last couple of months?
I have a question on
Sure.
number 7.
Mhm.
Do we have a inspection on the buildings or whatever project it is that does not have a long lifespan on it? So when we're going out making, say, if we have a schedule to inspection annually or biannually, so as the time gets closer to where we're needing to make repairs, like you said, we could have that window to start putting money aside or considering where we're going to get this money for the repairs, so it just won't come up at all of a sudden or because of weather-related events and so forth. So do we have inspectors to go out on a regular basis to look at our infrastructure?
So he said, what I will tell you is Janice and I are going to add a little bit to that recommendation to that effect. The answer to your question is both yes and no.
Okay.
We do have some folks in property and facilities management that have responsibilities for doing this. I think the issue has been capacity. They've had a pretty, over the last 2 or 3 years, a pretty significant amount of turnover. I think they're getting back to fully staffed. But as the buildings get older and older and older, they are spending more and more time maintaining those buildings. And as they're doing that, I think we've lost some of the capacity to do some of that preventative maintenance activity. And so Janice and I will work on wordsmithing number 7 to ensure that we do the facility condition assessment and then that we maintain that assessment schedule over time so that we don't get ourselves back into a place where we're having to do another massive kind of facility needs assessment to figure out where we're at, that we're doing that on a continual basis. That is a best practice in the industry. There's no question there. I think that we've just had some capacity issues in staying on schedule with doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Anything else with respect to what we have on the page here or discussions that we've had about expenditures, revenues, tax revaluation, the revenue neutral tax rate? Again, we are scheduled to come back 2 weeks from now and both approve your recommendations as well as for me to present to you the ins and outs of the city manager's budget. It is always appropriate. At that point, we'll have a discussion if the CBAC wants to provide any recommendations to the city council on the overall budget or the proposed tax rate. Again, I can't tell you right now what it is because that budget hasn't been presented, but when we come back, we will have that discussion. So you always have the opportunity to add a recommendation at your next meeting as well. But is there anything else here that you wanted to include or change? Not hearing anything, what Janice and I will do is try and turn this around very quickly with these changes and get it back out to you so that you can see it, so that we can come back and have an official approval of the document for recommendation to city council. We have kind of, in getting to this part, again, skipped over the beginning of the document. If anybody has read through that, has any issues with it, feel free to let us know. You can shoot us something via email. We can talk about it today, or again, we can talk about it at the next meeting for approval. Most of that is kind of what the work plan was, as well as what was presented in each of the monthly meetings. So hopefully we have captured that. And again, we'll catch any spelling errors or grammatical errors that we have in that as we do another review. But generally speaking, without additional discussion, we will clean this up, add the things that we have talked about today, and then bring that back for an official vote at the next meeting. Hearing
I'm
nothing
spelling
else.
error as you were talking, Scott. I highlighted
Yeah,
it.
I saw that. I got an extra zero in there. It happens. I believe the only other thing we had on the agenda for today was approval of the prior meeting minutes. I want to make sure we do have. We can either, again, we have another meeting that we're going to schedule for 2 weeks out. We can kick that to the next meeting and do those that way. And then also, when Tony comes, we can talk to him about how these recommendations are going to be presented to the city council, with him being the chair and whether he's able to do that. So if everyone is okay with that, I may actually just push the approval of the meeting minutes to the next month or next agenda, which is in 2 weeks.
Okay.
What's the date of our next meeting?
It is scheduled, Janice, don't let me lie here. I believe the 28th, which is 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, so I'll
Okay.
pull up my calendar really quick to make sure.
I think that is usually here when we get to the end and the manager's proposed budget comes out, there's another meeting in shorter order so that we can come back and talk about the manager's proposed budget. And I think we also had to amend the original meeting schedule a little bit because of the cyber event the city had. So
It is the 28th.
it is the 28th. So we'll get that invitation with the link out to you very quickly. We'll make these changes to this document by the end of the week and get it out as well, so that we can come back in a couple of weeks and appropriately talk about the city manager's budget and get this approved. Any other questions, concerns, comments, issues for the CBAC at large today? Alrighty. I think hearing none, we will call for an official adjournment here. And we will have ended the meeting at 10:30. I appreciate everyone's time, and I will tell you, if there's something that today we didn't discuss, you want to get something to us, feel free to shoot an email to staff, pick up the phone and call us. If something hits you in one of these recommendations, again, later in the week, absolutely happy to kind of include that before we send it back out to the group at large.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn if we're ready. Anyone? We need a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Ross, seconded by Fred. All in favor? Show of hands or say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time again today. We will see you again in 2 weeks, and we will ensure that we got enough folks to get the correct documentation approved, and we'll talk about the presentation to City Council as well. I appreciate everyone's time this morning.
Thanks for your excellent work.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ross.